when you focus on what you've learned from an experience and you start to integrate that in your life, that's another way of finishing the business, is because you're completing something, right? You're really taking the experience you've had and you're really digesting it. You're processing it in a certain way to grow yourself.
It starts right here, deep in your heart. Start right here. Oh, that's where it starts. Right here. We look to your heart. It's always and only starting right here.
Tom Rutledge and Dr. Alan Berger bring over 90 years of clinical experience to this important podcast, and they offer you a guarantee. You will gain something of personal value from each episode. And now, what matters most.
It starts right here. Start right here.
Welcome back to Start Right Here, which is the only place we can start, always right here. And I'm Tom Rutledge, and with me is Dr. Alan Berger, and we're here to do part two of our unfinished business discussion. We got well into that last episode and realized we had more to cover, and specifically more to cover was how do you actually finish unfinished business? Because you don't really, but what do you do to get yourself some satisfaction? So how are you doing today, Alan?
Well, I'm getting ready for this big move to Pennsylvania. So I think I'm starting to create a lot of unfinished business that I'm trying to take care of. And it's quite overwhelming at times, and just trying to put one foot in front of the other. We were talking just coming on the show, man, there's a lot of moving parts when you're moving a family across the, especially when you got there's a 3-year-old and an 8-year-old involved. And I think I'm probably 10 years old now. So my wife's got to deal with that stuff. So it's like, she's got 3 children. She's moving across the United States, but it's coming together. And, I have to remind myself there's no big deals. If we don't get it all right, it's okay.
Mm-hmm. I mean, well, you're not going to get it all right. That's the thing. And by the way, that's a false measurement anyway. Very seldom. That's one of the things too. Is I get this right. It's like, well, any number of ways we do things is right, because what we're saying is it's like you make a decision, and the way I always say it is, one solution becomes the next problem. And that's when we take the word problem out of the whole idea of being a problem, really. It's like to just go like, no, that's what we do in our lives. We solve problems. We don't need to be always working to get to the place where we can dust our hands off and say, okay, that's done. We have it's nice to have breaks, but it's like, I think we're going to be busy as long as we're breathing.
That's it. That's right on. And see, it's so important for me to keep that in mind, is to not get hung up in having to do it a certain way all the time. I mean, that's where it gets done. It was so funny. I thought of you this morning. I was reading this. Warren Buffett, I think, has a new book out or something like this. It's something like Reflections for the Board or something like this. He's looking back over his life and some of the mistakes that he's learned. And it was so interesting. He said what you've been saying so many times. He used to set the bar so high for himself. Yeah. So he would go into a company that wasn't doing well, and his idea was, I'm going to be the guy that turns this around. I'm going to take this on. I guess there was Berkshire Textile Mills or something like that he had. And so he just, it was a company that wasn't doing well, and he was going to infuse all this money and technology and everything, and it didn't work. And he said, what I realized is that I had set this bar so high for myself, I created a serious problem. And by the end of the thing, all the textile stuff was being really taken care of outside of our country. He says these $15 million pieces of equipment I was selling for pennies on the dollar. I mean, one piece of equipment, he said, I paid $150,000 for. I sold it for $26 for scrap metal. I mean, and he was saying, and what I learned at that is drop the bar. You don't have to take a failing company and make it great. He says, look for a company that's doing pretty good and make it better. He goes, but I had this whole other idea in my mind that that's what I should be doing. And I had to smile because, my God, how many times have we talked about
the big should? Bar? Yeah, bring the bar. Well, it's, I think about that just simply as if there's a flight of stairs and your job is you're going to get to the first landing, you don't take that in one step. I mean, you really do. And the metaphor I use is the way I used to do it, and the way that I see people do it is they'll take a running start at the stairs and try to broad jump upward, which is a little harder than even straight out. Take a broad jump, see how many steps you can get, and you get up, you hit the fifth step, you land on that, and then you look and you're not at the landing, so you say, well, I failed, and so you go back down and start again. Instead of realizing, no, this is how I'm going to get there. It's that letting go of our belief that we can prophesy the future. Yeah. It's like, you go into something and you think it's going to be one thing. How many times does this happen to all of us? And it, turns out, well, no, that's not what happened. In this, I went in this, I didn't stay with this very long at all, but I met Alan Berger, and we decided to go over here and do this thing over here. I wouldn't be, it's like, I think I can think about that. Somebody can say, would you, you admit what you did wrong and how bad you were as a husband in your first marriage. Talking about cleaning up, past stuff. Because you feel bad about that, would you go back and change it? I go like, no, I wouldn't change it because this is how I got here. And, and as much as I can I do honestly have remorse and regret for how I treated my first wife, Karen. And we've talked about that a lot and have actually stayed connected. But the idea is I wouldn't be in the life I have right now had not taken that path. So part of that is just realizing the reality of the idea that, we can't know what we're going to be able to accomplish. We don't set the bar too high. And the other is you don't know what's going to happen next.
What you just said is one way of completing some unfinished business, because when you focus on what you've learned from an experience and you start to integrate that in your life, that's another way of finishing the business, is because you're completing something, right? You're really taking the experience you've had and you're really digesting it. You're processing it in a certain way to grow yourself. Absolutely. And I think this is the one thing that we would say to you, if you're out there listening. A lot of people avoid doing that because of the pain that's involved. Mm-hmm. They don't want to go back and see who they're not. They don't want to go back and face the worst in themselves in certain situations. Mm-hmm. And yet, when you find that courage, and I think it is some kind of courage. I mean, you and I have, you've heard me say this a lot, Tom. Only the best in us can see the worst in us, right? Only the best in us can do that. And that's a bit of the courage, man, because when I start looking at that stuff, I'm doing myself a big favor instead of avoiding it. But that's the big thing that keeps people, that I've experienced, it keeps people from growing from their experience. They want to avoid the pain.
Right. Well, right. And the truth is, I can say this about myself. If I want to, if somebody says, free associate, talk about, what kinds of things you see in yourself as the best of you. It's like, that's a big part of it. It's the ability, the humility, and the ability to go back and acknowledge those things. And it's that thing that you quote my little nutshell all the time. Learn from the past and get the hell out of there. But in order to do that, you have to go in there. And I mentioned my first wife. It's this fits into this very well, because I remember many years after, we were divorced in 1983, I believe it was. But we had a conversation somewhere, after many years where we'd both done a lot of therapy and work on ourselves, and both have been involved in recovery stuff. And one of the things that stands out to me is I remember sitting in a car in a parking lot in a Kroger grocery store, talking to her when we ran into each other one day, and we were both remarried. And one of the things we talked about was how the amends meaning not to apologize, but to change, the amends that each of us made or are making in our lives, the beneficiaries of those were her husband, Mark, and my wife, Dee Dee. And it's like, there was just such a, I would never have had that opportunity to share that. And I haven't even shared that part with Karen, but it's like, that just meant so much to me that we both could acknowledge that there was things for both of us to change. I would argue that I had a lot more than she did, but she's a very self-responsible person. And the idea that we did take it forward, and I am a better husband for a lot of reasons, but in part for how poorly I did in my first marriage with Karen. And she said the same thing about her with Mark. And it's yeah, and it is courage. I think we have to do is get over the idea that courageous people feel courageous.
Right.
You talk to people who do brave things. They don't, it doesn't feel, you do it because it's the right thing to do. You do it sometimes just out of, if there's a burning building and there's children in the upstairs of that burning building, you and I don't stop and think, about, our what kind of person am I? Whatever, we go. We do that kind of thing. Is that a brave thing? Well, it's an instinct that comes from our value system. When we do things that are courageous, it means we're doing it no matter what.
And that's more accessible to people than I think a lot of us realize, because you see, I think it's this idea. It's, I teach tennis on Sunday mornings over here. Mm-hmm. And I was showing somebody this exercise you do before you pick up a racket to hit a volley, right? Mm-hmm. You stand in a ready position and a person tosses you a ball underhand. You step forward with your hand up, if you're right-handed, with your mm-hmm. left foot forward, and you catch the ball in front of you, mm-hmm. like you would if you were hitting a volley, right? If you mm-hmm. put a racket mm-hmm. in your hand, it's the exact mm-hmm. thing. And this woman that I was teaching was catching the ball underhanded. And I said, try to catch it with your hand, invert it the other way. Mm-hmm. Because I can't do that. Mm-hmm. I go, interesting. Throw her the ball and keep your hand up. And she walks over and catches it. And she looks at me and I look at her. I go, so much for that can't, huh? Mm-hmm. I go, see, you don't realize is that when you put those limitations on yourself, yep. You don't realize that you have already now defined your reality. And if I wasn't there to push her over that, she would have never experimented with turning her hand the other way. She mm-hmm. would have kept doing it the other way, which was not going to allow her to really figure out how to hit a nice, crisp volley. And I said, let's try it again. She caught it again. I said, so what do we want to say to that can't right now? Mm-hmm. She started laughing. I go,
it's great.
Go, yeah. You got it. I mean, you got it.
Well, it's an affirmation, That's right. We talked about this with someone in the Thursday night meeting not long ago, where somebody was saying they didn't like affirmations and all this other stuff, and I took the man's point. I understood, because when people are talking about them in the form of like, say this 10 times a day to yourself, I'm good enough, I'm smart enough, and doggone people like me. It's like, those are not going to be that helpful because the affirmations we're countering are constant affirmations. And I always point out to people that the word affirm just means to make firm. It doesn't mean positive. It means to make firm. So if I say I can't, that's an affirmation, and a lot of times what I'll teach people too, as you make progress, and we could plug this into working through unfinished business too, but it can happen anywhere. Once we do something new, we will often follow that with an old affirmation, like somebody would catch, like she would catch the ball then, and she would say, well, that's really amazing because I can't do that, and they go back to the affirmation. What I say is, you got to change your language, which is something you and I talk about a lot. And it's like to change the language to, in the past, I have not thought I could do that, instead of in the past, I couldn't do it. What you taught that woman at that point was, in the past, up until that moment, she actually believed that she couldn't.
That's right. Exactly.
And we can change it. Some things change like that.
And that she mm-hmm. changed it like that. And mm-hmm. see, and I say that because those of you out there that have wounds from your past, issues that you think will never be resolved. And look, a lot of this can be the way that you've been trying to resolve the issues, mm-hmm. right? I mean, people sometimes think of forgiveness as somehow letting the other person off the hook, right? I've heard people say, I don't want to forgive them. They don't deserve my forgiveness.
Mm-hmm.
And what you and I try to help people is forgiveness is not for them.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's not for them. It's for you. Is when you're forgiving, what you're doing is you're letting go of some of the energy that you got tied up with this other person.
Oh, you called you've used this from one of my early books that says the definition of forgiveness is not something we do, but our natural state when we're not holding on to old pain. And so, to me, the forgiveness is about letting go, and you may forgive someone, and they may never even know it. It's like, it's also not always, it can be, but it's not always an action that you have to take with that. And that brings me to the point where one of the things, if we're talking, I think probably the main point I would want to make in this episode when we're talking about, what do you do about unfinished business, is one of the big mistakes that people make is believing that in order to finish the unfinished business of the past, of a family of origin or previous relationships or abuses, things like that, is that working through that and healing that has to involve the people that were involved in the damage. Now, sometimes as we know, because of if you're in a relationship with these people, ongoing, parents, sometimes that kind of stuff, you do choose to do that. But even in those situations, that's never where it starts. It's like I tell, the simplest way I can say it is I told somebody this the other day. It's like, the problem you have here is not your mother. This was a 40-something-year-old woman talking about her mom, who's still in a relationship with. I said, it's not your mom. Your mom's not the problem. The satellite your mom planted. That's, this is the part where, like Bob Subby says in Lost in the Shuffle, as children were victims, as adults were volunteers. It's like, no, you didn't put that there. Our parents really did whatever we got from them. We those introjects, I think I'm using that term correctly, yep, that we get from them. It's like, but the thing about it is, well, and actually this came up. I remember the very first piece of work you and I ever did together was at that workshop we did accidentally in Los Angeles. And I remember one of the first things I did, which helped me know that you and I we were having a good time together, is somebody was working with a message from her mother. And I remember what I did is you asked me what I would do with that. And I got that internal voice that agreed with her mother to sit in the chair. And she had already chosen somebody to role play her mother. And I just took that one and that person and stood her beside there. So, okay, that's the origin of your message. But right, but she's not the problem anymore. The message is the part of you that agrees with that message. So if your father told you were a piece of shit all your life, it's like, it's like, even now, if he's still reminding you of that on a daily basis, then that's a problem that needs to be resolved with good boundaries. And we'll get to that. But the first thing you have to do is find out that part of you that agrees with that negative message. That's where that multiplicity as opposed to singularity comes in. And the idea is these are boundaries, just like interpersonal relationships. We have to have boundaries. The way I say it is the part of me that can still at times attack me. This character in my head, he greets me by saying "fuck you." That's how he comes into the room. I swear he does. And it's like, and the difference nowadays is that I know who he is and I know who I am, and that helps a lot. And that's a process. If you could actually witness that experience, he would come in and say "fuck you," and I would look back up at him and say "fuck you." So it would be, and therefore I am completely whole at that point. I don't have to be rid of him. I just need to understand I don't buy it anymore. And that's where the healing starts. Then what you find is that the pain and the difficulty becomes easier to process because you're not part of the perpetrator.
Yeah. So I want everybody to hear what Tom just said, because this is such an important point. The power is in you. See, when we think that I can't complete this unfinished business unless they change, unless they take responsibility or come to us and ask for forgiveness and stuff, you're not limited by that. you can create this, just like Tom just walked you through that exercise. The power is in you. And see, a lot of times, it's interesting, Tom. Jess was just listening to a podcast. I can't remember the person who was doing it, but one of her main thesis, in terms of helping parents parent better, is do not raise your kids to be victims. Right. And her whole approach is empowering her kids right from the get-go in terms of being able to take responsibility for their life. So it's like emotional sobriety, right, for parenting. It's really emotionally coaching those kids to be able to empower themselves, realize they have choices, to not let them fall into that victim mentality.
Well, you're basically raising emotionally sober children.
It's
like you're basically raising children who won't need us, won't need people like us, because like a friend of mine says, oh, my kids are gonna have other problems, but they're not gonna have the same problems I had.
That's right.
And it's like, I love that. It's
so good. I mean, it's such a powerful way, because we're finally getting these ideas. They're starting to get integrated at all different levels, right? In terms of how can we best show up in life to live a well-lived life. I mean, that's the bottom line here. And this is some of the technology that we're talking about.
Yep.
Another thing I took from your tennis analogy was, if you're embarking on a process of amends and taking care of unfinished business, it's good to do that with help, with support, with, be that a sponsor or, some, Jedi tennis instructor.
Yeah. Right. Or somebody just who's a friend in the process with you. But yeah, because we can all do that, and we do that for each other. It's not just about, nobody knows all this stuff. It's we can see things. It's the old glasses on the head thing. It's like, I can't find my glasses. Well, 2 out of 3 of us know right where my glasses are right now, because you're looking at me and they're on top of my head, and it's like, there are just some things we cannot see in ourselves.
That's so true.
I think Alan's working on his coloring
Jedi
book.
Tennis instructor thing. The Jedi tennis instructor.
Well, you are that, and that is, at least I would imagine that happens a lot. But I would think that, how much fun we're all going to end up in Metaphors Anonymous one day, because we're so damn addicted to metaphors. But how about you getting to be right in the middle of one of your favorite metaphors as a tennis instructor?
That's right.
I envy my wife Dee Dee, who's an equine therapist, because she works inside her metaphor. It's like the metaphor is the relationship of the person and the horse, and it's like, while they're working on it, it's they learn how it's a metaphor, but it doesn't start as a metaphor. It starts as a very, very specifically a relationship between that person and that horse.
I'm a big fan of Dr. Irvin Marion Polster, and I was just looking at what they talk about in terms of unfinished business. So I just wanted to read this for me, because it's so interesting. We've really talked about the two sides of the coin here that they talk about. So they go, whenever unfinished business forms the center of one's existence, one's effervescence of mind becomes hampered.
All right, do it again. Say that again.
So when unfinished business forms the center of one's existence, meaning we're carrying around a lot of money, one's effervescence of mind becomes hampered, because we're constantly pulled by all this unfinished business. They go, ideally, the unencumbered person is free to engage spontaneously with whatever interests him, and to stay with it until his lively interest subsides and something else draws his attention. He goes on to say, this is a natural process, and a person who lives according to this rhythm experiences himself as flexible, clear, and effective.
I love the term unencumbered person.
Yeah, isn't that
because we're always talking about letting go of things, putting things down, and certainly one of the things we do is things that are particularly heavy, we help lift off of people and put down. But that's ultimately the freedom of this, is that you are unencumbered. And what the pollsters say there directly is, what does unencumbered take you to? It takes you to free choice.
That's right. Being flexible, clear, and effective. flexible, clear, and effective. I mean, that's a healthy, functioning individual. They go on to say there are two polar hindrances which may interfere with this process, which means finishing your business. And we've talked about these, but in a different way. But I think it's worth describing them from their point of view. The first is the obsession or compulsion, which constitutes a rigid need to complete the old unfinished business and which leads to rigidity. So it's like, I got to finish this. I got to do it right. It's like not letting it happen. Like you were talking about, there's a natural process to it. And if you try to control that process and you try to force it, it's not going to happen.
Well, all the way back to what you said, Warren Buffett was talking about.
That's
if
right.
you have an outcome already, it's good to have direction, but it's like to have a very specific outcome, can be really a problem because that outcome may not even be an option. That's
right. Then they said that the other side is he calls it the labial mind, which leaves little opportunity for the person to experience what is happening because the focus is so fleeting as to prevent closure from developing and being experienced. So that's the person that is not going to hold still to feel it. The other person is holding on. I'm going to fix this. I'm going to solve it. I'm going to do it now. The other one, I'm not going to touch it. I'm not going to touch it. I don't want to touch it. They're both, you're falling out of one side of the bed or the other. And what Tom are saying and I are saying is stay in the middle of this. Stay in the middle of it. Now, sometimes, and this is the thing I wanted to get to today, sometimes you have to intervene paradoxically with yourself. Now, what does that mean? You might have to say, I'm not going to face this. I'm going to avoid this. I will never look at this. You have to make that declaration out loud, or you're going to say, I'm going to control this and I'm going to make sure it gets resolved in the way I want it to be resolved right now. I mean, see, both of those declarations can get you to the point of letting go of that position and experiencing the other side. What we say, as soon as you own what you're really doing, then something new becomes possible.
Right.
But you can't experience something new until you own what is.
Acceptance is a powerful tool that we come back to this point all the time. It's like acceptance. People mistakenly think acceptance means agreement. People mistakenly think acceptance means I like it, or I'm okay with it. It's like, no, acceptance just simply means that it's the reason. I mean, this is a totally silly thing, but it's like the reason I don't go out, even though I would love to fly like Superman. The reason I don't go out and jump off the top of my house to see if I could do that is because I fully accept that that's not a possibility for me. It's like, so I don't get myself up that way. But the idea is so often what we do is we accept things prematurely as just fact.
Yeah.
And then we think, and we believe we can't, it's an unrealistic expectation. Either that I'm going to do it, like you're saying, do it completely and perfectly and wonderfully, exactly the way I'm going to predict it, or I'm not going to do it at all. And I love the idea of and I think that comes up a lot in therapy that I think of is lots of different ways that I think one of the things that we do that is we give people permission not to do it. It's one of the things that I have another quote, little one-liner about forgiveness that I use quite a lot that's hanging on my office wall, and it says the first step to genuine forgiveness is to give yourself full permission to not forgive.
There you go.
Because it's not a choice. If it's not a choice, then you're doing it because you think that somebody else wants you to do it, or Jesus wants you to do it, or somebody wants you to do this. And it's like you're not giving yourself a choice. It's fine if your choice lines up with what somebody else's belief is, but let it be your choice.
That's right.
Don't. So many ways we're just really we're unfair to ourselves, that double standard. It's like, would you insist that another person, if somebody else, one of my favorite things to do is just to ask somebody, if you and I were sitting here talking to another person, if we had a third person who was our client together, would you say the same things to this client that you're saying to yourself? And of course, immediately they go, no, I would not do that. It's going like, okay, well, that's that what I call negative arrogance. It's like it's a special rule just for you. And it's not the fun kind of arrogance. It's the kind that basically I am, the piece of shit the world revolves around. I heard somebody describe it one time.
Did you guys actually knock out all your unfinished business? I mean, when you went through the process?
I'm finished. Yeah.
You're finished? That's a joke.
No, yeah, totally a joke. No,
but I'm
not.
Really? So still there's business yet unfinished.
Well, because it's going to keep, see, life is going to keep, I was talking to you guys about the situation I'm dealing with now, and I'm in a process in terms of finishing it. There's some unfinished stuff, and the conversation this Thursday is really to help me get to a completion on this thing, and I was telling you about it. So life is going to continually confront us with issues that need to be completed. Think of it that way, Patrick. What we're talking about is life presents us with issues that we're going to engage and that need to be completed in some way. We're going to need to move towards resolution. Another way to call it is wholeness, right? We're always moving in that direction. So you're going to hit something. You might be able, like, let's say you're sitting there and saying, God, that bean and cheese burrito sounds so good. After we're done with this thing, I'm going to eat that thing. Well, when you go eat it, you're going to be finished with that bean and cheese burrito. You're not going to be thinking about that anymore. Now, if you deprived yourself of that, then you're going to be creating some unfinished business until you take care of that burrito or whatever, until you take care of your hunger, essentially. So our needs and desires are presenting themselves to us all day long. Right. Most of the time, we're pretty good at just being responsive. And, in Gestalt therapy, we call it responsible, being able to respond to our needs or desires to take care of them.
Absolutely.
We do that, they move on. But when you don't take care of something, let's say you were in a situation and you were really hurt and you didn't cry those tears and you didn't talk to anybody about it, that's going to be unfinished for you. And it's going to hang around until you go back and find the words that would have really captured your experience at the time.
I can't believe I'm going to say it this way, but it's like, I want to say, and correct me if I'm wrong, that's kind of a wrong way to approach it, is to think we're going to finish all our unfinished business. Wrong in the sense that I don't believe that's a possibility. I think that what you're talking about is things will bump into us in life that then all of a sudden, emotions don't exist in the past. The events do. And so if I feel an emotion that comes up all of a sudden, I'll be surprised by that. And so you tell me something about, this happened to me not too long ago, where somebody said something about the loss of one of their pets, and it tapped into my relationship with a golden retriever that I had that died many years ago. And all of a sudden, I was just overwhelmed with grief, and just I didn't know that those feelings were still there at that point. I'd grieved a lot and done that stuff, but it points us to those places where we do attend. And what we do is we attend to it. And the other piece I want to say too, Patrick, is that one of the mistakes I see that people make unfairly to themselves is when we have something that we think we've processed and that we think I've learned those lessons, and then they show up again later. Okay. Now, what we immediately do, the negative saboteurs usually take advantage of that and come in and say, see there, you've learned nothing. And what I realize is, I can give you plenty of examples, and I'm sure Alan can too, of times when we've learned nothing. And we had, and I'm, one of my one-liners is, God doesn't flunk anybody, but he sure gives a lot of retests. So we keep getting those retests over and over again. But sometimes there's a chapter in my book, Embracing Fear, about this that I just call Encore. It's sometimes we're coming back to the same lessons over and over again, because as nearly as I can tell, and I have no factual objective knowledge about this is just my subjective experience with myself and other people. Sometimes I think we all have certain, what I call life themes, that we're going to be learning about all of our lives. That we circle, but we're not going in an actual circle. We're spiraling. So each time we come around to that lesson, it's going to be from a little bit of a different angle. And we're going to be, the way in the book, what I do is I tell people, here's how you can tell if something is a life theme. If when it comes up, you hate it, that's a life theme, because we get so tired of these things coming up, responsibility with money, has been one of mine in my life, and it's like it just kept coming and coming and coming, and I'm starting. I'm still, I have not seen the last of it, but I make improvements, and I do better, and I do that. So one of the things I want people to do is if you're re-experiencing stuff that you think you've already worked through, do yourself a favor and don't attack yourself. Don't buy into that attack. It's like the idea is like, no, there may just be more to learn. And I think, if our life is a desk full of stuff, I'm assuming that if we're really paying attention and doing the best we can, we'll all die with a full desk of stuff. That is, when I drop off, I don't think I will have been finished if I live to be 95, 96, maybe.
I love your young enthusiasm, Patrick. See, when I was your age, I used to think that way too. And I think the older we get, you just realize that the best you can do is take care of what's in front of you. It's going to keep coming. And I think I had this fantasy that someday I would just find that secret to life. And from that point on, life would just be fine.
I remember coming out of a week-long codependency, week-long intensive when, early, like 1986. And I remember actually saying the sentence, "I'm so glad I've taken care of that family of origin stuff."
That's right there.
I mean,
finish with it.
How stupid am I? It's like, and we all know what the next scene is. You've seen that movie. Well, that I've taken care of that. Well, what is that sharp pain in my ass right now? Well, that's more of it to be had. But it's like, right. But the other piece about that, you're talking about where Patrick is different in development with his life, is if what we're saying sounds discouraging, what I want to say is it's not. It's maybe you have to go through that, but it's like it really is just part of life, and it's like, I mean, it's not distressing. It's not distressing to me today. That part I would say that I have, and I bet you do too, Alan, is the idea that sometime, in the history of our relationship, the three of us, we've been through this before with each of us and some different things. I'm going to hit some stuff that's going to be tough to deal with. And it's like, and one of the cool things about that is, among other, depth on the bench and support that I have in my life, yeah. What I have after this wonderful silver lining that came from this horrendous COVID thing is I have the two of you as a part of my support system. I know that when we're getting ready to record it, if we're getting ready to record a podcast and we're talking beforehand, if I'm having a hard time, I don't have to keep that a secret. I take a minute and tell you what's going on with me. Yeah.
But to continue your analogy of the desk, piles of finished or unfinished business. It's just healthy for a lot of business to be coming across that desk. And I mean, that's how you know you're really in it, and you're
there you go.
Yeah, and you're really attended to it.
Great way to say it, Patrick. That's a great way to say it.
I love that.
And sometimes this stuff gets finished with a shift in perspective. I remember Dr. Mary Goulding. I went to one of her trainings at the Evolution of Psychotherapy conference. She was the founder of what they called redecision therapy, which is they took Gestalt therapy and transactional analysis and kind of created this hybrid. And it's really a very powerful way of working. And she was working with this therapist. She invited people to come up for a demonstration. And what he was talking about is that he always had this, he couldn't let go of the fact that he hurt his dad when he was younger. And she said, well, what happened? And she went through the story, and they enacted. So they just didn't talk about this, but I'll just talk about it because she had him play the father and then play himself and go back and forth. But I'll summarize what it was. So he was a sharpshooter, and they would do these things on stage where he would like shoot plates and stuff like that. And it was a competition, and it was a 22 caliber round, and they would have to load it so it couldn't penetrate the target and go beyond the targets, right? So you had to just the right amount of gunpowder to get it to go that whatever it was, 50 feet or whatever it was. So the dad was the loader for him, right? His dad was the one who would load these rounds, and then they'd go to these competitions together. And dad was saying, I'm experimenting with some new gunpowder, and I want to test this thing to see how it is. So if you would, I want you to shoot me. And son says, okay. So the dad goes 50 yards away, or whatever the distance they have on stage is, 50 feet, I guess, not 50 yards. It would be 50 feet. And son's a good shot, and the dad turns, and the son shoots him in the back, and the dad goes, ow. And all of a sudden, the son felt terrible. Oh my God, I hurt my dad, and took off his coat. There was a big welt on his back, and he says, God, I guess I got to adjust that load. And it's just, that's too powerful. Mm-hmm. So his son carried this guilt around all his life about shooting his dad in the back. And it was like,
literally, I love the story. It's
know, right? And she said, she says, so what's unfinished with you? Well, I just feel so bad. I hurt him. She goes, you didn't hurt him. He goes, what do you mean? She says, you just put a welt on his back. He had a little physical pain for a minute, but he wasn't really hurt. I mean, it was just a transient thing that he realized that the guy had to change the powder out. Mm-hmm. And you should have saw the look on this guy's face at the moment that she framed it as you never hurt him. You put a little welt on his back. For a moment, he experienced a little amount of pain. And his whole life, he was carrying this idea like he had devastated and like he had shot his dad and wounded him in the back, right? Like the bullet went through him. It was unbelievable. At that moment, he let go of all of that guilt that he had been carrying his whole life as an adult.
And all she did is she changed the language of what he basically, the message he got at the moment that his father said, ow, He
turned that into, I heard him, and it was just a moment of pain, and he had a welt on his back.
Yeah. Turned it from I hurt my dad to whoops,
to a whoops. You see that?
And it's not even a whoops, because ultimately, if you look at the story, what he did is but first of all, the father in that story, so literal, it represents self-responsibility. He's the one doing the loading, so he's the one that's going to find out whether it's going to do that or not. So he's he's not putting somebody up. Hey, get over there, let me see how this works. It's like, I know a lot of people who would do that. It's like
that's right. Yeah, let me try this on you. See,
let me try. Hey, Alan, move over there. I'm just gonna shoot you. It's like. No, he did that. But the other thing is he learned something from it immediately that basically made everything better.
That's right. Immediately.
Yeah.
And this is what Tom and I changed. Sometimes these things can change like that. Things you've been carrying around your whole life can change in this moment when you get the right perspective. So what a great show today, guys. We got one more show left on Start Right Here, which has been an incredible journey. Yeah. That'll be our 40th show. Wow. I like even numbers.
Well, and we want to say to the people who are listening is don't go anywhere, because we're not going anywhere.
We're not going anywhere.
There's a transition happening here. We're moving to
shape shifting.
We're shape shifting.
We're shape shifters. Oh my God, I've always wanted to shape shift.
We are. And we're going to talk more about that next episode then, because we'll be saying goodbye to the Start Right Here.
And the importance in carrying on, it's almost like part 3 to unfinished business, is being able to have a complete goodbye when you need to.
Love it.
It's a spiral, not a circle. Goes round, round, round. Look for solutions, be your own friend. Never say never in either direction. Look in the mirror, trust the reflection. Deep in your heart, start right here. That's where it starts. Right here. Won't you look to your heart? It's always